Megan Powell joins us to talk about getting into the recovery industry through service. She talks about growing up with a family member with mental illness that she couldn't relate to, being diagnosed with bipolar 1, and gaining sympathy through her own personal experiences. Enjoy. Welcome to the Illuminate Recovery Podcast. We shed light on mental health issues, mental illness, and addiction recovery. Ways to cope, manage, and inspire. Beyond the self-care we will discuss, you may need the help of a licensed professional. My name's Kurt Nider. I'm a husband, a father, entrepreneur, a handyman, and a student of life. I avoid conflict, I deflect with humor, and I'm fascinated by the human experience.
And I'm Shelley Mangum. I am a clinical mental health counselor, and my favorite role of all times is grandma. I am a seeker of truth, and I feel like life should be approached with tremendous curiosity.
I ask the dumb questions.
I fill in the gaps.
The Illuminate Recovery Podcast is brought to you by Illuminate Billing Advocates. Make billing and collection simple with leader in substance abuse and mental health billing services. Verification and analysis of benefits, pre-authorizations, utilization management, accurate claim submission and management, denial and appeal management, and industry-leading reporting. Improve your practice's cash flow and your ability to help your clients with Illuminate Billing Advocates.
On the podcast today, we have the privilege, and I'm super excited to be talking with Megan Powell. Megan is in long-term recovery herself. She has discovered her passion is to help others suffering from substance abuse. For the past 5 years, she has volunteered to help spread the word of recovery by participating in community presentations at treatment facilities, universities, prisons, and community-based correctional facilities. Megan, thank you so much for being on our podcast today.
Thanks for having me.
This is going to be fun. I know we were just getting to know each other a little bit before we started recording, and it might be really great for our listeners to get a little bit of an idea of your background, where you come from, and some of the experiences that you've had that have brought you into the substance abuse world. Because what I think is true, I have not had anybody question me on this, is that when we're little and we're thinking about what we want to do when we grow up, substance abuse treatment and recovery was not ever one of the things we thought about.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the age of 4, I wanted to be a veterinarian. Like, I was the kid in the dirt, looking for moles. I really thought that's what I was going to do. And I think, how parents give that book you fill out every year?
Oh, yeah.
You update it each grade level. I think I went from vet to teacher to president, and if I only knew, right? So growing up, my mom was a social worker. My sister ended up being a social worker, and my dad worked in student services and higher education. So basically, most of my family were working in some type of service role. And, I went to school really not knowing what that was going to look like. I had seen mental health and addiction within my own family, grandparents, and also more closely my brother. And at that point, I was at an age, in high school and college where I didn't quite understand what addiction was. I kind of looked at him like, "Hey, buddy, can you cut it out? You're ruining your life. You're ruining everyone else's life." So it wasn't until my own experience in addiction, and also I was diagnosed with bipolar 1 when I was 25. How much of an impact not only does it have on an individual, but on just everybody around them. So I have this perspective from experiencing it myself, and also experiencing from a very close vantage point with my brother. And so, after college, I had different roles, different positions within marketing and sales, and I was always volunteering, especially once I got into recovery. I started working at a small university here in Columbus in the military services and adult admissions. And in that role, I worked with a lot of vets and adult students and getting them to where they needed to be with education. And there was one thing missing, like the people that were veterans and military servicemen and servicewomen really needed some type of level of connection that I couldn't offer. And it was the first time I saw the value of peer-to-peer, the therapeutic value of you understand, you've been through something similar. And a major general came to work on campus, and I could see those interactions and what transpired. So it was kind of the first moment where I was like, wow, like this does remind me of that, one addict kind of helping another addict as a therapeutic value, which attracted me to maybe I should really look in a different field outside of higher education. And I was at a recovery conference. It was for those that were in recovery, and I was like in the cabin or whatever, and one of my friends was talking to me, and she said, did you ever think about working in the treatment world and helping people find solutions to what they're going through and treatment programs and working with those individuals and families? And ever since then, I went and I had those conversations with Recovery Village, where I'm at now, and I've been there for almost 3 years. And I was exactly where I needed to be. So yeah, that's a little bit about my background.
That's fascinating. And when some of those experiences, and I'd love to ask you a little bit more, and without prying, because it's my nature to just ask questions, but I recognize that there's a lot of people listening, and so don't answer a question if I ask one that you don't want to answer. But talk about that relationship with your brother, and then your own recovery process as well. You're looking at him and going, buddy, you're ruining your life, you're messing up our lives, and yet you had some mental illness that you've, I assume, are dealing with. I'm going to say that that's a continued process, right? We kind of have to figure out what that looks like. So talk about that journey and the struggles that you had, and your relationship with your brother. Kind of talk about that a little bit more.
So me and my brother were always close growing up. He's 3 years older than me. Whatever he wore, I wore. Whatever he bought at the store, I wanted to buy at the store. He was extremely smart ever since I've known him. And both of us kind of shared that kind of anxiety, overthinking type of mentality, like who am I, what am I in the world, almost just like a little too intense for at a young age. We kind of shared that. And one way we were able to kind of cope with whatever that was sports and activities and all the things. We wanted to do everything major, and we just adrenaline and all the things, and it kind of foreshadowed our behavior later on in life. And I remember being in high school and picking up my brother with my mom from a party, and his behavior being completely different. He was normally like really chill, just really sweet, and then he would drink or use substances that just this other side came out. And they tried to ship him off to my dad in Oregon, try to get his life together and change the scenery. And then, the later years, he kind of got it together a little bit. I got a phone call from my mom. I was a junior in college. Mom says, your brother's dropping out of law school. He was in the top 5 percentile of the LSAT scores. Got a full ride to law school. He had a meeting with the dean, and he was pretty bad. And, they got his car back from Florida because he went to school down in Florida. And, it was covered in, just needles, spoons, just stuff that, it was awful. And I remember thinking, what are you doing? And I just wanted to shake him. And I remember when we would not be able to find him, we'd drive around the city, looking for him in ditches and at the pharmacies or wherever. And I'm like, this isn't normal. Not like any family is normal, but at the time I just felt like this is just crazy. And a couple years later, I was introduced to, the drug that I like to use, which is an opiate, in college from my roommate. He was like a track star for college and used them to kind of feel better. And he's actually recently died of an overdose. And I tried it, and I said, wow, this really relieves all of that pressure from having anxiety, questions with my self-worth. I had also questioned, my sexuality for years. I didn't come out until later. So I think there was a lot of underlying things where I took this drug, and it was just like that moment of, oh, wow, that feels good, and I'd like to feel that way again. And it just steamrolled my life. And the way my addiction played out within myself and my family was very different from my brother's. My brother was, everyone kind of knew, and it was everyone was trying to save him and all the things. And I remember, for me, I internalized everything because I said, well, starting to have a little bit of a problem, but as long as I keep it under wraps, no one finds out, I'm not going to harm anybody else, I might be okay. And after a while, it just got to the point where, I kept my job because I thought that's what I wanted, to kind of make me feel like I was still a productive member of society. But, no house, no money. I think at one point, I was just living with a friend off a couch. I don't even know if the toilet worked at that point. Not that that mattered to me. I just really needed to get what I needed each day. And then my brother had moved in with me shortly after that time, where I was kind of at my worst. So it was like a recipe for disaster at that point, because then you got two people who are using, it was a hot mess. And then that's when he was exhibiting symptoms of his schizophrenia, the paranoia, and it got pretty dark pretty fast. I remember him asking me if I bugged his car. And I'm like, listen, brother, you're not really that interesting. I'm not going to bug your car. And I tried to laugh it off, to be like, okay, this is getting real weird. And then, I remember a time, he had told me this later. He had told me this, before he passed, that he did have voices tell him, to walk into a college and harm people. And so it's scary. And, fortunately, my experience with my psychosis, shortly before I was diagnosed bipolar 1, was my saving grace of why I'm clean today. And that's a story on its own, is what transpired during that time.
That's just, there's so much complexity there, right? Of loving your brother and seeing how his behaviors are impacting you and the family and himself, and then getting into addiction yourself. It's interesting, those cycles and patterns that happen, and often driven by mental illness in many cases, right? Or exasperated by the substance abuse. So it's super, I love that you're willing to share your story, and it might be valuable to talk about, your diagnosis and that journey, just because it's, for me anyway, the story is probably the most powerful force for encouraging people to get into treatment. And I'm sure you tell your story a lot, but I think there's power in that. So maybe talk about, if you can, your bipolar and how that impacted your recovery.
Absolutely. So, bipolar is one of the most misdiagnosed, it just is. And, towards the end of my using, I was reaching out for help. So I kind of got off the hard stuff and thought I was doing okay, and turned to the bottle a little bit. And I still had a lot of things that I was pushing down very deep. So my brother was living with me. I'm still working. I kind of get my stuff together a little bit. And I fly to New York for work. I'm out there for 3 or 4 days. And the last day I start feeling odd. I start feeling almost like I had taken some Adderall or like speed or whatever. My heart was beating fast. It's mania. I didn't know that. And I started having these kind of grand ideas, and I'm in this like final meeting before our flight home, and I'm just like firing off these questions. I'm like, oh yeah, like I'm so involved, and I was feeling on top of the world kind of, and I'm like, I don't know what's going on because I'm not really using anything. So I remember on the flight home, I was like frantically journaling, still have my journals, about life and about oneness and truth and just enlightenment and wanting to be honest with the world and blah, blah, blah. So I fly back in, I get back to my apartment, and from that moment on, it got worse. I got into a place where I turned my phone off. I wasn't going to go to work. I was in a different form of reality. It's kind of hard to explain, but I just felt nothing made sense anymore. I didn't know who I was. I didn't know where I was. I was just very disoriented. And my brother, who, you know, being schizophrenic and having his own issues, is kind of like, what is happening right now? And he's like, I think the government, like, took over my sister, and his paranoia is going wild. I'm going wild. My friends come over, dear friends of mine that I've known for a while. And I thought we were there for 2 hours, but we were really there for, I mean, maybe up to 10 hours. And they said my face looked different, the way I was holding my face and talking. They said that I kept telling them to ask me questions so I could tell them the truth. And then I started journaling again frantically, kind of writing almost scripture-esque stuff, which is kind of like, this is like sort of prophecy complex within like bipolar that I think I was experiencing. It's almost like something about like the subconscious kind of grasping onto, it kind of grasps onto like spirituality sometimes, because it's kind of like what's trying to ground you. And I think that's what was happening. And I started to write down on a piece of paper, what do I do? What's happening right now? I'm like literally writing this down. And then I start drawing an arrow. And it was almost like something was controlling my hand, like I wasn't writing it. And I think I was writing with my right hand, which in fact I'm left-handed. And so I'm drawing this arrow over and over again, and it's pointing to me. And underneath the arrow, I put the answers inside you. And at that moment, I said, I think I need to go somewhere. They're like, yes, we've been telling you this whole time. I was out of it. Like that, I thought this was just something I came up with. But it's kind of interesting that it does need to come from me. You know, I was in the midst of complete chaos, but I needed to make that decision for me. And so it didn't really end there. The cops had to come to the house and have a chat with me. And they took me into psych at Ohio State. And I had delusions in the emergency room. I had thought that, so OSU was under construction over a period of time. There's really loud noises. It was almost like they were renovating some of the rooms. And I'd look at my friend and I'd say, hear those noises? I'm doing that. And she'd be like, no, Megan. No, you're not. And they're like, my friends are whispering to each other like, she's on something. This is insane. Well, the toxicology thing came back, or, you know, my urinalysis, nothing. And so they're like, something is up. And I had delusions in the ER room that, you know, those shock paddles to revive somebody. I really felt them. I felt like I was getting shocked. And my mom came to see me. She drove 3 hours down in the middle of the night and stayed with me all night long in the ER, where I got transferred to the psych floor. And all I remember is there was something different about her eyes and everyone's eyes that I came in contact with during this psychosis or this crisis. And I just felt like something higher was coming through, and it was the craziest feeling. And then once I felt like my body was getting shocked, it was almost like a voice told me, you know, this part of you is going to rest, so that you can kind of continue on with your life and be the you that you need to be. It was so crazy. I just was like, I can't believe this is happening. So, you know, long story short, I finished my stint inpatient at psych. I continued doing some outpatient. You know, I'd been connected with 12-step prior to this, so started going back to meetings and feeling real connected. But when I read books about enlightenment, like one of my favorite authors is Adyashanti, Falling into Grace is the book. That was a true depiction of enlightenment for me, like spiritually, mentally, emotionally, physically, of what it means to completely surrender and find a new way of life.
Wow. How curious. And is that's the first manic episode that you had ever experienced?
I had experienced some mild mania prior, and I kind of covered it up with substances, and I covered it up with, you know, I'm just going through something. This is weird.
Do you think, this is always the question, is do you think that your substance use played into it, meaning made it more, exhibit more, or do you think it just is what you deal with?
I had thought about that a lot, and that's something that I asked professionals about as well. Like, was there some type of correlation between the fact that I had stopped using opiates and I was just drinking, and there was like some transition there where my body like was out of whack or whatever? I do think that I would have been diagnosed bipolar 1 no matter what, despite the using, but I think it amplified it, and it also covered up a lot of symptoms that would have been exhibited prior to that. Now, most people are diagnosed like in their 20s to mid-20s. My grandmother had bipolar 1. My grandfather was schizophrenic. And I know they're still doing a lot of research on why it happens, how it happens, why it, you know, all the things. So I do think it contributed to it, though.
Well, and it would be rightfully so. You would imagine that on some level it's going to contribute to it, but you know how much? And I don't think you can answer that question, but it is definitely one that we are always asking, right? Like, what's the role? How do they interplay? And so today you deal with bipolar. What does that look like? Because that's not always easy to manage. What do you do today to try and keep yourself, you know, as balanced as possible?
There's a lot that I do for the bipolar. So it's very interesting because, you know, I go to 12-step for, you know, the addiction piece. I need to fill my cup up. And I'm very out about being in recovery, you know, from active addiction, as many people are. You don't see as many people saying I'm in recovery, you know, and I'm also bipolar 1. I haven't had a psychosis for, you know, six and a half years. So I need to remember that I have to continue on, you know, coping with things and understanding the addiction piece, but it's just as important to understand the bipolar piece, because what triggers me and what I've identified over the years is any big major change. I moved apartments, and I've moved a lot, but for some reason this move was hard on me. And one evening after I moved my stuff in, and I had to work the next day, and I was up till 4:30 in the morning hanging up stuff on the wall. And I wasn't like doing the whole measuring it out, making sure it was straight. I was just like taking it, nailing it to the wall. I mean, granted, when I woke up in the morning, it was actually pretty legit, but it was mania, and that lasted for like a couple more days. Now, I don't quite identify as much with the depression. That usually hangs out for a while, and it takes me a while to realize, you know what, I think I'm depressed. But I do see a therapist every 2 weeks. I talk about it. And what's interesting is that when I bring up stuff going on in my life, sometimes it has to do with me being an addict or me being bipolar or having bipolar. And sometimes I think this is the fact that you're human. I really don't, you know? So he kind of helps me get through those situations. And I do a mix of things for, you know, my spiritual, my mind and body. So I do acupuncture. which has been huge for me. I get to a meditative state where it really, really benefits me. I do guided meditations. Sleep is huge for bipolar. That's something that's hardest for me, to be honest. That's pretty tough. But there are, essential oils and stuff that I kind of before thought, is that really gonna help? Like, is that really gonna? And it's interesting because being bipolar, having the sleep issues can actually be a trigger for my addiction. So there's all these things that are overlaying that, I'm not really sure, what to do at that point other than I'm going to talk to somebody about it. I'm going to go to a meeting. I got the support that I need. I got to check in with myself. And then I also have to look at what I'm really grateful for. And luckily I have amazing support system here, phenomenal, in Columbus, Ohio.
That's so valuable. I mean, we talk about that a lot on the podcast about the idea that connection is the opposite of addiction, and that, our network of people, it makes all the difference in the world, and that without that, I don't know that anybody could be successful really at maintaining sobriety or managing bipolar or mental illness of any kind, because I think connection is huge. So I love to hear you say that. You also talked about a little bit about your own sexuality and struggling with that, and what that looked like before you came out. That seems like a whole nother layer of complexity. Do you want to share any of the thoughts and experience around that?
Absolutely. So growing up, I mean, I was a complete tomboy. And it wasn't until and I think a lot of women and a lot of people just experience this, but around the age of kind of 9, 10, 11-ish, I start looking at other people and comparing it to me. I feel really different. You look different. I'm kind of chubby. What's happening here? But I remember going to a Halloween party, and I was a preteen, and I wanted to look scary and crazy. I kind of looked like Adam Sandler in the 80s with a mullet meets a vampire. That's kind of what I looked like, and I was so excited about it. And I show up at this party, and all my friends were genies and princesses, and they looked all cute. And that was the first moment where I was something up here. I feel like something's a little off. And that might just be being a young woman versus having questioning about my sexuality. But it's kind of the first time I kind of looked around and, thought, well, maybe I need to be more like them. Maybe I could wear more stuff like that. Maybe I could do my hair like this. Maybe I could flirt with those boys. And it felt like every relationship I was in from there on out, high school and college, I didn't really care. I loved the person, and I felt for the person, but there was something missing. And I thought, well, maybe it's me. Maybe I'm just kind of broken, and I'll just have to figure this out. And in early recovery, I had dated a couple times, and I would always go for the friend. I would go for the person I thought I had a connection with, but in reality, it really wasn't a intimate love connection. It was more of a friend. I'm comfortable with you. Maybe this is what it's supposed to feel like. And it was the closest thing I could come to. And, I had been blessed with a friend in 12-step. She's still my best friend. And, she told me about her coming out, and she had been gay for many years. Very confident. In fact, she worked in HIV prevention, and we would talk, and I kind of opened up to her something's going on here. And that's kind of the cool thing about recovery is once we're able to open up and be honest with ourselves, and then in turn be honest with other people, we get clarity. And I felt like that was happening. Like I was finally able to not worry about what anyone else thought. It wasn't about anything but what was going to make me happy and how I felt. And then those experiences follows where I really got to experience what intimacy was and how it felt. And then came, of course, telling my parents. You know, I was in my 20s, and it was a beautiful experience to be able to share that with them. And I had to go into it like I had to go into like how kind of the steps talk to us about like amends and like addressing, you know, with honesty and stuff like that. And I just took those spiritual principles and I applied them, you know, to what was going on with me and coming out, and, you know, sharing that I had a girlfriend, and the response and the love that I got from the people close to me, I mean, it just filled my heart. And I have faced some questions and adversity and, you know, some challenges with that, especially for the people who knew me for that long, picturing me a certain way with a certain somebody. So it was difficult, but it also has opened up my eyes to, you know, working in behavioral health, of how we use confirming language and care for those individuals who may be questioning or who may be LGBTQ. So it kind of was a gift to be able to have that perception and use it, you know, to kind of help in our community. Because Columbus is in the top 15 cities of LGBTQ populations.
Well, we've come a long way in our culture of learning, you know, how to think about and be more open and accepting of you know, people and situations that are different than what we're used to. But boy, back in the day, and I know you're a lot younger than I am, but that just wouldn't have happened, you know, back when I was a kid. That was not something that was readily accepted, and it was confusing, and people had a hard time. So I love to hear that was a very, you know, supportive experience for you. That's powerful. And then you talked about, you know, peers helping peers, and so you've got a lot of relatability. You talked at one point about early on in your career working with military and watching you know, a colonel or I don't remember what you said, come in and really have a connection. But at that stage of the game, you weren't dealing with addiction. Is that true?
So at that point, working at that university, I was in my first year or two of recovery. Mm-hmm.
But you felt like that this peer in the military had much more connection with these military people than even you could have being in recovery. There was something more there. It sounds like what you heard, what I heard.
Yeah, absolutely. And I remember working there, and a student was in class who had PTSD, and the professor asked him to stand up and read. He said, "No, thank you, I don't want to read." And they asked him again. He said, "No, I don't want to read. You know, it's triggering for me." And the professor kept pressing it. And I remember that student coming back, and he just was he felt really defeated and embarrassed. And I just keep thinking, like, well, where's the training? Where's the, you know, any institution can say, I'm LGBTQ friendly, I'm military friendly, I'm whatever. But are we backing it up? Like, are we really following through with that? And are we giving them the resources? And one of those resources is providing that major general to be that liaison, and to be a resource, you know, for those students to truly have what they needed to succeed, because they have different challenges. We don't think about that, of what they face when they're with civilians. And even like the topics that get brought up, you know, they're in a history class, you know, they're talking politics and they're talking this and that, and it's through a whole different lens, and they need an outlet to be able to go to somebody that understands them.
Mm. You make a really good point about, you know, really, I don't know if calling these disabilities are the best way to categorize it, but these are challenges that people experience because of human nature, because of what they've been exposed to, and this is normal, you know, responses to trauma. But we don't understand, if we've never put in that situation, we have no frame of reference. We really don't understand, and so it's been a long haul to try and educate people. And I've been in the educational arena and seen how they address disabilities, and that's in quotation, right? People's challenges. And I think there's a real effort being made in some areas more than others, but it's so difficult to help people, really understand what that requires. And I'm sure this professor, had he really understood what PTSD was and that's what he was struggling with, maybe he would have been more compassionate. Um, but yeah, I think about it all the time. You hear people say really unkind things, and then you've got to help someone else understand, yeah, it wasn't right for them to say that, but that's all they knew how to say. They didn't get it. And if they got it, they wouldn't say that. And looking at people as though they're trying to do the very best they can. And then you go back to that education piece, which is big for you. I mean, you're out there talking in universities, prisons, community-based correctional facilities. Maybe spend a little bit of time of talking about what's the message out there and what you're trying to accomplish.
Absolutely. So it's kind of funny you bring up the some of the presentations. One of the first times I shared my story with a women's prison, I was terrified. I thought it was going to be 25 women. It was like 250 women.
Oh, wow.
And you can't bring your phone in. And normally I use music as a comfort, And they're like, oh, you can't bring that in. I was like, yeah, darn it. So I walk in and I'm going to, share my story of recovery and mental health. And it was more kind of like a 12-step format where someone would introduce me as kind of like a speaker. And I go up to they say inmate. I go up to the woman to introduce me. She turns around and I know her. She was my roommate in the psych ward who gave me an NA book and who gave me clothes my first night there. And I instantly was like, now this is just a telltale sign that I'm exactly where I need to be. And I was like so nervous. I'm kind of asking the universe, like, give me some type of sign that like I'm in reality here and I can do this. And there it was. So I kind of just started, volunteering and finding ways that we could create connection for others. And that was, sharing my story, that was supporting others share stories, and then also creating panels to discuss certain issues. And my main goal when, establishing a panel and having those come and network and share and learn about addiction and mental health is that it needs to be raw. There's a lot of surface stuff we could go over, but who's willing to get really raw? And raw doesn't mean, it doesn't mean everything needs to be down and dirty, but it's just, what is the truth of the situation happening here? And, for one of those panels, there was, a fire chief who was sharing about addiction response and the statistics and the real life stories of what they see. And I think it was important for people to hear that. And so being a part of that and having things kind of organically come together and be able to like support that and share it with the community has been a true gift.
Well, and I guess a little bit near and dear to my heart is those women. I worked with women in a halfway house coming out of prison early on in my career, and that was a life changer for me. That changed the way I saw my world, and really that perspective of, yeah, okay, I know why we've incarcerated these women, but it's not right. This isn't the kind of help that they need. They're victims as much as they've victimized other people. And it's like, it tugged at my heartstring, and I heard some stories that would just curl your toes, like, oh my heck, I am one of those entitled white people they talk about in my textbooks, right? And just bring a new perspective of people and experiences and really where they came from, and no wonder they're having the struggles and challenges that they are. So when you talk about going in and talking to that group of people, they're incredible. And the fact that you see people that right? You see people that this world is way smaller than I think that we realize, right? And we come across people all day long that's like, I remember I was walking into a place yesterday and this lady's like, yeah, I know you. And I'm like, I know you too, but I don't know where. Somewhere. We'll figure it out one day, right? So I love that you do that, and that you're always out there educating and helping people understand ways to think differently and ways to get involved and ways to help, because I think it's so important. Talk a little bit about the programs that you work with, and how those are helping people, and why you find, because I know you talked about passion, so I'll ask two questions: where you're working and what you're doing, and also why passion is so important to you. What role does that play in the work that you do?
Sure. So with the volunteer side of things, I have volunteered for the 12-step community here in Columbus, and there's anonymity to that. So anytime I'm able to serve, and my name isn't on anything, I mean, there's humility in that, and it fills my cup up, but at no point is kind of like the ego taking over. And I remember a moment where it was COVID. Like, so dramatic. And in the beginning, all of the meetings were in person, and all of the churches and all of the organizations were shutting us down. Can't meet in person. And this is like people's lifeline, my lifeline. And for the next 3 or 4 or 5 weekends, from the morning to night, we took every single meeting, put it on an online platform, provided trainings for people who could run the meeting for those people. For those people who didn't have a phone, we created an 800 number for them to call in, or we just any barrier, we knocked it out. And then like the 4th, 5th weekend, me and these other volunteers, we looked at each other. It was only like 3 of us, and we're like, oh my God, like what just happened? It's like because there's thousands of people in the area. And the gift that came from that is that people who are in the outskirts of the city, who don't have the means or transportation to come to live meetings or in-person meetings, were able to log on. And they weren't logging on to like the national meetings, which could be beneficial, right? They were logging into more local meetings where someone might be 30 minutes, 45 minutes away. They were logging into their Ohio community, and in turn building up contacts and support, maybe getting a local sponsor. And so it's like the darkness turns the light type of situation. So that's kind of like a lot of volunteer stuff we do. And we've done talent shows, Addicts Got Talent. We've done the first year 12-step recovery was in the Pride Parade, and there's tens of thousands, of hundreds of thousands of attendees at that parade the first time. So we got to go through, and we were holding signs, and of course it was more about a credible program of recovery and less about promotion, in line with the traditions of 12-step. But you see people out in the crowd, holding up their fingers. 1 year, I got 2 years, I got 3 years. I'm one of you. And it was just it was just something that gave you goosebumps all over your body. Mm. So, in my professional side of things, I'm the director of outreach at Recovery Village in Columbus, Ohio. So it's one of 9 facilities that are part of advanced recovery systems. And so it's primary substance abuse, secondary mental health. So we treat people who come in for medical detox, residential, partial and outpatient services. And, what's interesting is when we pull the feedback from clients, whether it's like a review or a feedback we get, and this goes for probably any facility, that talk about some of the amenities. It could talk about, oh, it was great, cool or whatever, but mainly the comments say, so-and-so helped change my life. Sarah, my therapist. Nicole, my case manager. So-and-so, the doctor I was seeing. And they talk about the team of people there, less about the facility. And we take that very seriously at Recovery Village. So we have different specialties. We have a sister facility that treats IFF firefighters. We have a facility that can do underlying eating disorders at Recovery Village. We can treat physicians, and but the key piece of that is having great people and handpicked leadership to be able to serve the people that need the help. And a good example is our medical director, Dr. Tiffany Bell, is triple boarded psychiatry, addiction medicine, DO, and she's on site. She's there every day. she'll call me with different ideas of how to help people. What I learned about this neuro testing or whatever. And so that's what makes us, you know, and it sounds kind of silly, but a village of, we're your lifelong village. You come here, you don't come here just for treatment. You come here to build a community, have support, get aftercare. You know, it doesn't stop here. You're with us for 30, 45 days. You know, that's nothing compared to the rest of your life. What are we going to do to set you up for the rest of your life? So,
which is so important. I was just telling somebody that, you know, has a fairly new facility, and I said, look, you know, it's one thing to give treatment, and it's a totally another thing to create a community that this is a lifelong thing, and you're going to be there every step of the way, even after they're done with treatment, right? That's an important piece that you have to create as you're building this, and obviously you guys have done that. It's so, I can't think of too many places where a doctor is so dedicated that they are present and willing to talk with people whenever they need it, and not just, you know, you have an appointment, you get 5 minutes, that's it, right? That's, you know, the need for psychiatrists and doctors is so huge that there's this huge burden on them. So I love hearing that you know, that there's a relationship there with the doctor as well as the providers and other staff members. That's huge, and we've talked about the importance of relationships. So I love to hear you talk about that. It's huge. Megan, I just want to thank you for being on today. It's been fun talking to you and hearing your story, and, you know, kind of, you know, feeling that sadness as you talked about your brother and that experience and your recovery, and just the whole journey has been pretty powerful. I am absolutely certain that there's going to be people want to reach out and connect with you. What's the best way for them to do that?
well, if my email wasn't a mile long, I provide that. I think I spelled it wrong even when I gave it to you. Let's just go with my number and a call or a text. So again, it's 614-369-0880. That'd be great.
That's awesome. And you know, not everybody's willing to give out their phone number and their cell number at best, but you know somebody's serious about helping people when they are willing to do that and understands just how important it is that somebody can connect with you when they need it, even when it's very inconvenient for the rest of us. So I love that. Megan, thanks so much. I just made my day to listen to your story and hear that journey and just see where you're at today with the challenges that you have and the healing that's gone on. So thank you.
Thank you for having me.